Welcome back, peeps. And today we're going to be continuing with some more of the wondrous world of Utopia, chapters 9 through 11. And we're only down to 76% full, so thankfully we're going to be able to get this done. And before we get into the story, if you want to get this, if you want to read these in order, you should check out the playlist. I have a playlist for that, so you can read them in order because they don't put it in order for you. And let's get started with the party, shall we? So that's chapter 9. It's a little far ahead, so no spoilers. Gotta get there, the pages are being stuck together again, and chapter 9 is megalodons. Megalodons are pretty self-explanatory. They're creatures that look like giant axolotls, as you can tell by the name, megalodons. They are the largest vertebrates living on Utopia. The females can reach lengths of 150 to 300 feet, and their weight ranges from 500 to 1,000 tons. So these are absolutely giant. This is twice the size and over 5 times the weight of the blue whale, or about the size of a 30-story building laying on its side, horizontal. They are roughly the size or the length of Godzilla, though they are not quite as heavy, because according to a Google search, most of the Godzillas weigh anywhere between 90,000 and 100,000 tons, and since that's a little too big, I made them a bit smaller. So they're small, they're very long, but skinny at that scale. The males are much smaller, at around the size of a crocodile. The reason they can get this big is because, again, the high oxygen levels in the water and the availability of food. Though gravity isn't a big concern while they're in the water, so they can get much bigger than most of the creatures that we've discussed, like the guacamole, which are only about 3 times the size of a T-Rex, the leech, which is twice the size of the T-Rex, the giant pillbugs, billers, and, yep, those things. They live in the ocean. They can survive in freshwater, but there aren't many bodies of freshwater that creatures this large could live in. Their color ranges from jet black to dark brown, jet black to indigo, but they can also be bioluminescent and glow rainbow at night. All of their skeleton except their jaws and their skull are made of cartilage, like sharks and stingrays. So because of this, their skeletons, if they became beached, they would just collapse and die. Like all vertebrates on Utopia, they have that violet-globin in their blood, which makes it purple. The chemicals in violet-globin gives creatures extremely long lifespans, but it would be toxic if ingested by humans. Instead of laying eggs, they give birth to live young, or babies. They can have up to 1,000 babies at a time, but reproduction is quite slow. They will stay pregnant for up to 140 years. Then, when the time is right, the cloaca, which is a multi-purpose hole in reptiles and amphibians that is for pooping, peeing, babies, and other stuff that I don't think I could explain because I don't want to get canceled, opens up, about 40 feet wide to be precise, and all of the babies, which are about 5 feet long, come spilling out. After this point, the odds are stacked against them. The babies will be at the mercy of every and all of the aquatic predators. Most of them will become snacks, but a few of them will survive, reach maturity in a few millennia, and have babies of their own. This life cycle is very efficient or effective, because if all of these babies survived and reproduced too quickly, the megalodons, these kaiju-sized creatures, would literally wipe the oceans clean of all the food. They would eat up all the food in the ocean. Megalodons are carnivores, So when fully grown, they are the apex predators of the ocean because nothing can eat anything that big. They feed on snails, billworms, aquatic allopods, platypedes, urchins, not pseudofish, submollusks, pinecone puffers, and by the way, if you can, maybe put in the comments what you think pinecone puffers are going to be, because we're going to discuss pinecone puffers. So I would really like to see your thoughts on what a pinecone puffer is. Also giganorays. I want to see your thoughts on what giganorays could be. Beak fish, plankton, megamoray, and even their own kind. They can also be filter feeders like whales. They feed using powerful suction, vacuum-like suction, and extremely powerful jaws. They have hundreds of teeth, each at least 3 feet long and a bite force of 100 tons. Most prey is sucked in like a giant vacuum cleaner and swallowed whole. These giants need to eat 20 tons of food per week to survive, and they have an average lifespan of 20,000 years. So that wraps this up. And today we're going to be getting into, next we're going to be getting into chapter 10, Megagastropoda, which we've discussed. We're discussing what different creatures eat, but yep. The shorter name for this creature is the giant paddle slug. They're rather gentle giants when they don't feel threatened. They reach lengths of 30 to 40 feet and they weigh 7 to 8 tons. Roughly the size of a T-Rex, but since they don't have legs, they're not as tall as a T-Rex. So basically, picture a T-Rex laying down on its stomach, but it's a slug, not a T-Rex. Like billers, they travel in large herds containing 50 or more slugs. They communicate by belching. They do this by forcing air through their pneumostomes, the orifice that slugs have that connects to their lung. Not lungs, because slugs have one lung, so it's just lung. They have 7 tentacles, unlike typical earthly garden slugs which have 4 tentacles. Three eye stalks, 2 smaller tentacles below the eye stalks, and then 2 very large tentacles underneath the smaller ones. These large tentacles are used for self-defense. Sometimes the slug's large tentacles have these calcified paddles at the ends that make them more deadly. So, since slugs evolved from snails that lost their shells, on Earth, a lot of slugs that lost their shells, the shells just became internal. But with these slugs, the shells evolved into these calcium clubs that some have at the tips of their tentacles that they can use to swing at predators and things of that nature. These are very flexible and can swing at almost all angles. They have a symbiotic relationship with the billers. They lay their eggs in the billers' nests, which are just holes in the ground, and then the eggs are protected by the billers until they hatched. The slugs leave extra slime over the eggs, over the slugs and the billers' eggs. This gives both eggs extra protection. Due to their large size and lack of skeleton, they spend most of their time in water, returning to land only for short periods to lay their eggs. Land isn't a friendly place for truck-sized creatures with no skeleton. So these slugs are kind of like hippos in that they spend most of their time in water, because a T-Rex-sized slug would not survive on land very long. They would collapse into a disgusting mess. The same thing with the giant leech that doesn't have a skeleton. They could not support their weight on land, so they are in water most of the time. And the only time they ever come on land is when they're laying eggs. And even that carries the risk of collapsing. These slugs are herbivores, feeding on water plants, fruit, and mushrooms. They eat using their radula, a tongue-like organ covered with teeth to scrape away at their food. The slugs eat 500 pounds of food per day to survive. They defend themselves with their large and extremely powerful lower tentacles. One smack could break bones, rupture internal organs, and even crack shells. They could even send a car flying. The paddles they sometimes have at the tips of their tentacles can do even more damage. Catastrophic damage. They have a lifespan of 500 to 1,000 years, and that is a wrap-up of the giant paddle slug. And next we're going to get into chapter 11, which is billworms. Billworms, not to be confused with billers, are a species of giant flatworm. They get their name from their perfectly rectangular, dollar-shaped bodies. There are two species of billworm, the common billworm and the electric billworm, like the electric eel. They're on average 30 to 40 feet long, 15 to 20 feet wide, and they weigh 2 to 3 tons. They are similar to a manta ray, just more perfectly rectangular. Billworms are usually brown in color, but they also glow bright blue, red, or purple at night, or yellow at night, like an anglerfish. The electric billworm is usually white. They are able to migrate between freshwater and saltwater, depending on food availability. If they are cut in half, they would make 2 new worms. If they were cut into 100 pieces, you guessed it, you get 100 separate worms. They produce mass spawns of eggs like fish. They can lay 300 eggs in one day. Lay 3,000 eggs in one day. Billworms are filter feeders. They have their mouths in the middle of their bellies, which is traditional of flatworms, and this mouth is surrounded by thousands of cilia that allow them to catch plankton, algae, and other microbes. The common billworm's natural predators include megalottles, gigantarays, and a whole slew of other carnivores that would make this chapter longer than it needs to be. And if I went over it all, the electric billworm has no natural predators at all. Anything that tries to touch them would get 1,000 volts of electricity to the mouth. They have a lifespan of 60 years, so not really that long. And I think we could squeeze in one more. I said this would be chapter 9 through 11, but I think we can squeeze in 12. Chapter 12, Paragrades. Paragrades are a species of giant parasitic tardigrades. Now I say that these are giant because the tardigrades are on Earth are on average 0.2 millimeters long, the size of a grain of salt, and usually you need a microscope to see them. But these tardigrades are much bigger, at 1.5 to 2 inches long, and they weigh about 2 grams when empty, the size of a grasshopper. They're translucent, so you can actually see their internal organs when they aren't full. They are native to Abigalia, though they have been accidentally carried to other continents due to living on other creatures. They have 12 legs, each with very sharp claws. Their bodies are squishy to the touch, and if you stepped on them, they would pop like a gusher and blue jelly would leak out. Would you try blue tardigrade, giant tardigrade jelly? They attach their eggs to any surface that is firmly stuck in the ground, like trees, mushrooms, rocks, and even inside flowers. These eggs hatch into babies that start out about the size of a normal tardigrade, microscopic, near microscopic. Then they get bigger and bigger and bigger. Paragrades are, as the title suggests, they're parasites. They feed on blood, specifically the blood of creatures that have violet globin. Their hosts include abelopods, megagastropods, tooth snails, slobsters, guacamole, and the giant Abigailian leech. They feed by digging their claws into the host's skin. They feed by digging into the host's skin with the claws. Then they use a circular mouth with a ring of razor-sharp teeth to carve a hole deep into the flesh. They will then start drinking the purple blood using an anticoagulant chemical that will prevent the blood from clotting so that they can slurp, and slurp some more. After a good feeding, they will have swollen up to 10 times their original size, and their translucent bodies will have turned purple from all the blood that they drank. They will be so big that they can barely move, and they will then proceed to burrow deep into the dirt and digest their huge meal. They have a lifespan of 2 years, and that is where we wrap up. And we will see you another time.